Hi, my name is Zavier Wingham. I'm a PhD candidate at New York University in the Joint Departments of History as well as Middle East and Islamic Studies. As an ANAMED Fellow, I'll be conducting archival research on my project, which is tentatively titled Becoming Zengi, Formulating Race in the Ottoman Empire, 1840 to 1914. My research draws on the Ottoman archives in Istanbul and a range of primary sources, including periodicals, scientific journals, travelogues, and literature, to elucidate how changing Ottoman elites' conceptions of race, slavery, and blackness contributed to new forms of racialization of enslaved and manumitted Africans in the Ottoman Empire between the 1840s and the outbreak of the First World War in 1914. My project also utilizes British and French police reports, court records, parliamentary inquiries, and diplomatic archives to explore how formerly enslaved Africans in the late Ottoman period experienced these processes of racialization and sought to create new kinds of community and ways of living. By bringing together Black studies, slavery studies, gender studies, and cultural studies, I ask after the formation of race, in particular Blackness, in the late Ottoman period. So to give a bit of background, in the late 19th century, the Ottoman Empire experienced a revival in Black slave trade. Coupled with the Egyptian occupation of Sudan in 1820 and the Ottoman reoccupation of Tripoli in 1835, the presence of enslaved Africans in the Ottoman markets increased and forged a stronger link with the imperial center. Enslaved people in the Ottoman Empire, primarily African women and girls, continued to labor as domestic servants and to a lesser extent in agricultural production. So it's estimated that some 16,000 to 18,000 enslaved persons were trafficked from Africa into the empire each year. Despite the empire no longer recruiting their administrative elite via enslavement and its members no longer legally enslaved subjects of the Sultan, slavery remained an important institution that spanned across several geographies. Over the course of a few decades, the Ottoman Empire would experience several attempts at instituting a prohibition against the trafficking of enslaved Africans. By the end of the century, the 1880 Anglo-Ottoman Convention for the Suppression of Trafficking of Black People would become the first consequential piece of legislation. Yet, how did an empire which was less concerned with the ethnic and geographic origins of Africans, as opposed to its enslaved quote-unquote white people, i.e. Georgians or Circassians, determine who was considered Black, and thus subject to this new legal convention? How did Africans' livelihoods change as they became circumscribed by emerging processes of racialization? So in this project, I'm trying to think through Blackness in the Ottoman context diachronically while using a synchronic understanding of its production across different social realities. So by this, I mean attending to literature on slavery and Blackness in spaces beyond Africa and the Ottoman world, such as transatlantic, Indian Ocean, and otherwise spaces. One key element of my dissertation analyzes how common linguistic markers for Black, ergo Zengi or Arab, were deployed in reference to Africans throughout the late Ottoman period. By analyzing the works of Ottoman statesmen, writers, and travelers, I explore the development of the Zengi figure in shifting metaphors of slavery as Ottoman elites attempt to distinguish slavery from the British and French imperial projects of enslavement. I also investigate the writings of Ottoman travelers to Africa and the empire's evolving relations with the African continent. For example, in 1890, the French-trained Ottoman thinker and writer Mehmet İzzet produced an in-depth study of Africa, Yeni Africa, which compared its inhabitants to those of the Ottoman Empire, referring to Africans as savages and heretics. Nearly a decade later, another Ottoman subject, Mehmet Miri, traveled to Sudan via Egypt as an aide-de-camp to Prince Yusuf Kemal. Along with a thick description of Sudan's environment and geography, Mehri's Sudan Sehat Namesi provided a taxonomy of the African ethnic groups he encountered, drawing inspiration from earlier 19th century French and German travelers. These types of sources enable us, or at least me, to ask, how did evolving Western European conceptions of race inform Ottoman elite conceptions of race and enslavement of Africans in the 19th century? How did members of the Ottoman elite come to understand the connection between African origin and servile status? How did emerging notions of civilizational hierarchy inform elite racial ideology in the Ottoman Empire? Unearthing the experiences of enslaved Africans is another key dimension of my project. I utilized sources such as police and court records, British and French parliamentary inquiries, and diplomatic correspondence from the network of major Mediterranean port cities, ergo Tripoli, Izmir, and Istanbul, to investigate how enslaved and manumitted Africans in the Ottoman Empire experienced these new modes of racialization. My rationale for focusing on ports is twofold. First, all major Ottoman cities and ports saw the arrival of enslaved people from Africa. Second, attention to how the seas and oceans connect cities and peoples avoids methodologically severing these interconnected histories. Thus, I hope to capture a diverse range of experiences, from trafficking to manumission, across various contexts. I've already conducted preliminary research at the Ottoman archives in Istanbul, which has yielded hints of what I expect to find. For example, the story of an enslaved woman named Zarafet, who in 1885 seized her freedom by seeking refuge in the British Embassy, or how in 1894 a number of formerly enslaved Africans were brought from places such as Tripoli, Benghazi, and Jeddah to Izmir as part of an Ottoman government-sponsored project to relocate manumitted Africans. My project elucidates how enslaved and formerly enslaved Africans sought recourse through these shifting legal zones of influence around the Mediterranean basin. So this is pretty much what I'll be pursuing over the course of the next year, and despite global conditions, I'm extremely excited to begin research and hopefully join everyone in Istanbul in the coming year.